So it's been a while. Haven't streamed in like over half a year. Haven't uploaded a YouTube video in slightly longer. So what have I been up to? Mostly just working on art. Trying to just improve as best I can. Still making visible and noticeable improvements, so that's a plus. Still haven't really found a winning formula though. So that kind of sucks. My hard drive died again, so I've pretty much lost everything that I had before. So that's fun. If my voice sounds different, it's because I lost my old audio settings and kind of just cobbled together something new and as close as I could to the old settings. Picked up a real editing software, so no more Clipchamp, no more YouTube editor. Still learning it, so it's not gonna get too crazy, but it'll at least be nicer and more professional. But yeah, I figured with all of that kind of going on, I'd try YouTube again. Since streaming kinda was just brute forced into failure, going to try and put out some more edited video content now. Whatever's on my mind, whatever's been going on, anything I really want to talk about. And to start things off, about the middle of last year, miHoYo, who now go by Hoyoverse for some reason, they released a new game that had caught my attention. And with me kind of being stuck here, not really making any money, not really doing much of anything actually, I decided, you know what, it's free to play. If I don't like it, I can just uninstall. What's the worst that could happen? And it didn't really turn out as bad as I was expecting. In fact, it kind of flipped my opinion on these games. So I just want to roughly go through the three main games, how my experience was when I first started versus how it is currently. It's not gonna be a full-depth review of each game, but mostly just a general overview of my opinions of them. So it's time to go back to the past, but only like 6 or 7 months ago. We'll start with Zenless Zone Zero. This was the one that kind of started it all. I saw that it was coming out early July, and I didn't really have any interest in it. I wasn't unfamiliar with miHoYo, as I have played Genshin Impact before, which I'll talk about later. But just from that experience, I was already kind of putting myself at arm's length. But about a week or so had gone by, and I had seen it so much, with more of the gameplay coming out, more of the character designs, and sort of the drip marketing that was coming out. And I was looking for something to play, something new to really sink my teeth into and just kind of grind out forever. So I downloaded it. And honestly, things have been going pretty smoothly for the most part. But that's maybe due to the fact that I did watch a handful of videos about the game. Kind of the general rule of kind of what you should be investing in, keeping an eye out on, so that you don't kill your account, essentially. When I get to Genshin, I'll talk a little bit more about killing your account, because I definitely have some experience with that aspect of these games. But let's get back on track and start talking about the game and its gameplay. Zenless had 2 gameplay modes, but over the course of the past few months, that's kind of changed. But initially, it was just the combat mode and then the TV mode. There's also just the overworld, which is kind of its own thing, but it's nothing more than kind of a glorified hub world. But the combat is pretty much what drew me in. Just looking at it, it was very flashy, very reminiscent of like a Platinum game. The easiest comparison is probably Bayonetta, but it's kind of like a lighter version of Bayonetta. If you played Platinum's Legend of Korra game, I think that is maybe a closer comparison. But you can't buy that game anymore, so you're just gonna have to take my word for it. Even if it's not peak action game, I think it's still pretty impressive that this is something that runs on all platforms, especially mobile. The combat's engaging enough to keep you entertained, with throwing in a dodge or a parry every now and again, just to make sure you're paying attention. And generally, I think the combat is well liked. The thing that is generally not so much liked is the TV mode. At launch, it was combat and TV, and personally, I didn't really have that big of a problem with the TV mode, but it definitely got repetitive after a certain point, and they threw so much TV mode at you, it did start to hinder the experience. I don't think TV mode was a bad idea. They definitely showed some concepts and ideas that vary up the style of the TV mode with different kind of dungeon crawling experiences. I think it just boiled down to being too much and too repetitive to really gain a positive following. But that was at launch. Now they've kind of dialed back on the TV mode, which I can't really talk about how much they've dialed it back because I've already played all the side missions and story missions from launch. But from what I can tell, they have replaced it with this more kind of Mario 64, Fall Guys kind of platforming stage. There were some TV mode stages that had an interesting concept, and you could see what they were trying to do with that mode. But I think the platforming stage is going to be way better for the long run and offer way more entertainment than TV mode ever could. And it's kind of crazy to see the developers take all this early feedback of TV mode and implement a change and improvement in about 6 months. The last mode is the overworld mode, and I don't even know if you could really consider it another mode, but it kind of is. It kind of gives the game this pseudo Mega Man Battle Network feel when you enter the TV mode or platforming world now, and then you go into the real world. It kind of gives it that sort of real world, internet world kind of feel. And I don't know if they were going for that, but with MiHoYo games, you can kind of tell where the inspiration is coming from. So it could be the case. But there's not too much to the overworld. Sometimes there's an event that pops up. You might have to solve a couple easy puzzles, but it's mostly from getting from destination to destination. But for a game that's primarily focused on combat, I think the overworld keeping you engaged with the world and the characters adds to the experience. I don't want to spend too much time on the equipment and leveling up systems, basically because they're the same across all three of these games. So I'm not gonna talk about it really. It's mostly to do with clearing endgame content, because your equipment does not really matter in story mode. The game is ridiculously easy. And I do have the challenge mode turned on, so it's not easier than it already is. And it's essentially an endless grind for better gear, and you could never find that perfect piece. And on the topic of luck, I think we should talk about my experience with the gacha in Zenless. Because out of the Hoyoverse games, this one is my luckiest, and is partially the reason why I probably started playing the other ones. So the game was out for about a week before I started playing, but all of the release rewards were out, all of the extra download rewards were still coming out, so I didn't miss out on too much. And I knew from watching videos that based on who I pull early on is kind of who I want to build around, since I'm 100% free to play and not looking to spend any money in these games. So on my standard pulls, I was able to pull Lycon and Grace, but I wasn't really looking to use Grace just because the limited time banner was Ellen. So I did all my story missions, all the side missions, saved up as much as I could, won the 50-50 on both Ellen and the weapon. And I know the weapon isn't 50-50, but I'm just going to say it just because it keeps it simple. So I had built an ice team, and that was good enough to clear all the endgame content. Not 100% perfect it, but was enough to get me a handful of rewards. And at this point, I had already drained the bank, so I needed to save up and make sure I get the next character. And I didn't pull again until Caesar was out. And I managed to pull her early. So I went for her weapon and won it again. Saved up a little more, pulled for Bernice. And at this point, I was able to S-clear all the endgame stuff. And I didn't lose a 50-50 until I pulled for lighter. But losing that 50-50 basically guaranteed I could pull Miyabi and then go for her weapon. So that's what I did, and it paid off. And I am planning on pulling for Astra, so if you're seeing gotcha footage, that means I probably got her. But yeah, currently, difficulty is starting to ramp up. The new boss nodes are pretty difficult. I did manage to do the first one, but the one after that is pretty tough. And I definitely need to go back and rework my teams and refined artifacts and just get the general power of the account up. But yeah, that's where we are in Zenless. I'm enjoying it, and I don't see myself stopping anytime soon. I'm pretty committed to this game. This is one that I went into with no experience whatsoever. I knew it was turn-based, but that's about all I knew. And first impression is, I think it's the most engaging in terms of a story. Zenless and Genshin both really haven't grabbed me in terms of their story. Zenless still kind of feels like we're introducing everything, and Genshin I'll talk about later. Star Rail has this cosmic element that piques my interest a little bit more than the other two have. From the prologue to chapter 1, it was pretty good. Chapter 2, wasn't really feeling it. Chapter 3 was better, but from trying to catch up in the story so fast, I had missed out on other side stories that introduced other characters. So I was kind of lost in terms of who wanted what and what was going on. So thank you to people who make YouTube videos breaking down and summarizing the story. We're just starting chapter 4 now, so hopefully I have a better grasp on it. But I find that Star Rail is kind of the hardest one to get into. I think it's mostly just from how much power creep there's been in terms of which characters are good and which characters you should pull for. But I haven't really invested too much into my characters and artifacts and really fleshing out the teams. So it could be just at that point where everything is so min-maxed, there's not really a lot of wiggle room for catching up. And that's maybe where I'm feeling like I can't really finish any of the endgame content. It also doesn't help that I've been jumping around on which characters to pull for and which teams to build. So I haven't really just sat down and focused on any specific character becoming good. And I feel like because the game is so character dependent, the rotation of banners kind of hinders how fast you can progress through the team building aspect of the game. Like, I went into it pulling for the characters that I wanted to pull for. I knew about Kafka and I wanted to pull for her, so when she was up, I did get her. Looked up some teams that I could put together, and they work, but it feels like either I'd have to pull for another 5-star character that enhances the team I already have, or just go for an altogether better character and better playstyle. So I think my account is just a mess at this point. I just gotta refine it a bit, and we'll probably have these problems solved, which is a little frustrating. Star Rail is turn-based, so you kind of have to play it the way it wants you to, where Zenless and Genshin have a little bit more skill expression. So with Star Rail, it's kind of a mixed bag for me. I definitely felt like I was going to drop it, but with the story updates, it kind of brings you back a little bit. And having gone through the growing pains of learning the systems and how the game is played, I'm at that point where I'm starting to enjoy it again. But it's it still feels like it's the least engaging one for me. I mentioned that I had some past experience with Genshin Impact. I did have an old account, but I decided to start fresh just to kind of give myself a refresher on what's going on, what's new, and not really going back to an account that I kind of left in a bad position. I was there day one, But at the time, the only other gacha game I had ever played was Dragalia Lost. And if you played Dragalia Lost, you know that that game was pretty generous. Characters that were limited weren't really too rare, or, you know, you kind of knew when they would come back. So when I went into Genshin, I didn't realize when there was a character banner that was limited, that was the only time they were going to be available. I thought it was more like a boost to their pull rates and they would be added to like a permanent pool. I didn't realize that these characters were there and then gone. So I just wasted my primo gems, anything that the game would give me on like the standard banner or the weapon banner, anything but the limited character banners. And to put that even further into not knowing what I was doing, I wasn't even aware of the 50-50. So not only was I not building up pity, I didn't even know that if you kept pulling that you would just guarantee yourself the character at a certain point. So starting over again, watching some videos, and having some sort of idea of how I wanted to go forward, I've had a lot more fun with the game. Not really paying attention to the story too much, it has not really engaged me. It mostly just feels like we're wandering into someone else's problem, and then just somehow kind of fitting into the solution. But putting all of that aside, I think this game has crazy value. Just from the exploration aspect of the game, Genshin is huge. And for being something you can download for free, there's not really much else offering that, or at least to the same standard. But that's not to say that this game is perfect. Going through Mondstadt and Leeway again was okay, it was bearable, but I had quit right after Dragonspine had come out. So all of the new areas, Inazuma, Sumeru, Fontaine, I was experiencing for the first time. And Inazuma was okay, it wasn't anything crazy, and Sumeru was pretty bad. The story in Sumeru was good, the exploration part is horrible. And this is just with the in-game exploration stuff. I'm not using any outside sources or pre-made maps or anything like that. But Sumeru almost made me look one up. But thankfully, Fontaine, it looks like they dialed it back a bit, and I was not having the same problems with Sumeru in Fontaine. In fact, I actually like Fontaine. There's one more area that I went through. At the start of this new account, they were running an event for a limited time zone. I can't remember the name of it, but it was basically a little storybook world, and I really liked it. It probably has something to do with it being very Kingdom Hearts inspired, but it's not the first time I've felt that way. Fontaine has some underwater mechanics that are almost identical to Atlantis from Kingdom Hearts. But when Natlan started, it was completely different for me. This is the first time I've been there for a launch of a new area. And Natlan is just a completely different beast compared to the other zones. The exploration is just better. The music is just better. The story and characters have just been way more engaging than the last few zones. Capitano is just Genshin's main character. Like, whatever the Traveler's doing, okay, it moves the plot forward, but give me more of what Capitano is doing. Natlan is what Genshin should have been on day one. Being inspired from Breath of the Wild is perfectly fine, but Natlan adds enough of its own unique spin on things that it increases the engagement. Like, we are post Tears of the Kingdom now, and I think that formula is starting to get a little bit old, so any kind of new twist you can put on an open world game, it's certainly not gonna hurt. We're not even out of Natlan, and I can't even wait for the next area. For combat, I've kind of had a similar experience to Honkai Star Rail, where I knew about characters that I wanted to pull for, like Raiden Shogun, ended up pulling for them, and they were fun, but it really didn't add more to the game, and it was just kind of nice having them, which didn't really sit well with me. I was really like not having a good time just hitting the same buttons over and over again. And it's kind of my fault because this was during, I believe, Natlan. Like, Natlan had started already, and I didn't want to pull for the Natlan characters. I wanted to pull for the characters that I wanted, or for the characters I should have, like Kazuha. But after pulling for a couple more characters, pulling for Jalonen, pulling for Mavuika, I realized I should have just been pulling for all the Natlan characters. They're just built different, way more fun to play, way more fun to run around with. Night Soul is just a way better mechanic than just, you know, press a button and your character like shoots a fireball or like jumps in the air. It's like, it's not really doing it for me, but you know, you hit the button and then you have like a different mode of combat. That is getting me more engaged. So finally, after about 6+ months of playing, it finally feels like I have some characters that I want to build some teams around and finally start finishing the endgame content. And that's gonna be mostly it for these games. It seems like it does take some time to kind of fully grasp how to play and build your characters up, but I've really enjoyed my time with them, a lot more than I was expecting to. I know there's another big dog in town with Wuthering Waves, but I have not played it. Don't really have too much interest in playing it. I'm kind of made my commitment to these games, and adding one more is not really in the cards right now. But if this video does well and kind of exceeds expectations, I'll consider it. Maybe we'll do a sort of documentary style from day one to whenever I finish whatever I'm trying to get done. So maybe there's something there. But that's going to be it. Not a crazy in-depth overview. Just kind of my experience with the game and how I feel about them, or how I kind of changed my feelings throughout playing it. And thank you for watching. If you watched the whole thing, I appreciate it. I've got other video ideas in the tank, so hopefully we see those come to light soon. Going to be focusing mostly on YouTube from now on. If we start hitting some channel milestones, we can start to talk streaming again. But for now, it's going to be mostly YouTube videos. So yeah, hopefully things go well and we don't die.